In a quiet neighborhood filled with trees and flowers, the Johnson family decided to spend their Saturday outdoors. The sun was shining bright, and the birds were singing sweetly. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson packed a picnic basket with sandwiches, fruits, and lemonade. They wanted to enjoy the beauty of nature with their two children, Sarah and Jake. "Let's go to the big park by the woods," Sarah suggested excitedly, her blue eyes sparkling with joy. Jake, her younger brother, nodded eagerly. He loved exploring new places and was always ready for an adventure. The family arrived at the park and found a nice spot under a large oak tree. They spread out a blanket and sat down to eat. While munching on their sandwiches, they talked and laughed, enjoying each other's company. After lunch, Mr. Johnson said, "How about we explore the woods?" Everyone agreed, and they packed up their things. The family walked hand in hand, with Jake leading the way, his small feet quickly taking him down the narrow path. As they entered the woods, the sounds of the park faded away, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the chirping of crickets. The air was cool and refreshing. Sunlight filtered through the branches, creating beautiful patterns on the forest floor. "Look at that!" Jake shouted suddenly, pointing to a small clearing ahead. The family walked closer, curious about what they would find. As they stepped into the clearing, they were surprised by what they saw. In the middle of the clearing, lying on the ground, were two small creatures. They were not like anything the Johnsons had ever seen before. The twins had green skin that shimmered in the sunlight, and their eyes were big and round, shining with curiosity and fear. They looked like they were no older than 6 or 7 years. "Are they?" Sarah whispered, her heart racing with excitement. "Are they aliens?" Mr. Johnson knelt down to get a better look. "I think they are," he replied, his voice filled with wonder. "But we have to be careful. They look scared." The twins seemed frightened, and they huddled together. Their small hands trembled slightly as they glanced at the family. Mrs. Johnson, with her gentle smile, took a step forward. "Hello there. We're not going to hurt you," she said softly. "Can you understand us?" The twins stared at her for a moment before one of them, a girl with bright blue hair, nodded slowly. We are lost," she said in a shaky voice. Her twin brother, who had dark purple hair, clutched her arm tightly. "Lost?" Jake asked, his eyes wide with concern. "Where did you come from?" The girl looked around the clearing as if searching for something. "From far away. We need to go home," she said. Her voice was small, almost a whisper. Mr. Johnson stood up and looked at his family. "We can't leave them here." "They need our help," he said firmly. The children nodded, excited to help the strange twins. "Do you want to come with us?" Mrs. Johnson asked. "We can take care of you." The twins exchanged glances and then nodded again. They were clearly scared but also hopeful. As the family turned to leave the clearing, Jake spotted something shiny on the ground. He bent down to pick it up. It was a small, glowing gem, pulsating with soft light. "Look what I found," he exclaimed, holding it up for everyone to see. The twins gasped and reached for the gem. "No, you must not touch that," the boy shouted, his eyes wide with fear. "It is very important." The Johnsons froze, taken aback by the intensity in his voice. "Why is it important?" Mr. Johnson asked, curious. "It is our key," the girl explained. "It can help us return home, but it can also bring danger. We must be careful." The family exchanged worried looks, realizing they were in the middle of something much bigger than they had expected. "Okay, we'll be careful," Mr. Johnson said, his voice steady. "Let's go home and figure this out together." The twins nodded, and together they walked back through the woods, holding hands with Jake and Sarah. The family was filled with questions about the twins, their home, and the glowing gem. What kind of world did they come from? And what dangers lay ahead? As they reached their car, the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over everything. The Johnsons felt a sense of excitement and responsibility. They had found two lost alien twins, and they were going to help them. Little did they know, this was only the beginning of an incredible adventure that would change their lives forever. With their hearts full of hope, they drove home, ready to uncover the secrets of the mysterious twins and the royal truth that awaited them. Strange powers. The Johnson family arrived home, excitement buzzing in the air. The twins, who introduced themselves as Lyra and Oran, sat in the back seat, their big eyes wide with wonder. Jake and Sarah couldn't stop talking about the amazing adventure they were having. As they pulled into the driveway, Mrs. Johnson glanced back at the twins. "You're safe now," she said with a warm smile. "Let's get you settled in." Inside the cozy house, the twins looked around with curiosity. Everything was new and strange to them. The walls were painted bright colors, and family photos decorated the shelves. Jake and Sarah showed them their toys, explaining what each one was. Lyra picked up a stuffed bear, her face lighting up with delight. "This is so soft," she exclaimed, hugging the bear tightly. Orion stood beside her, looking shy but fascinated. "Can we play?" Jake asked, bouncing on his toes with excitement. The twins nodded, and soon the living room was filled with laughter and joy. The Johnsons felt happy watching their children make new friends. But as the evening went on, something unusual happened. While playing a game of catch, Jake threw the ball too hard, and it flew out of his reach, landing on a high shelf. He sighed, wishing he could reach it. Suddenly, the ball floated into the air and landed softly back in Jake's hands. The family gasped, eyes wide in surprise. "Did you see that?" Sarah shouted, looking at Lyra and Orion. Orion shrugged, looking innocent. "What? It just happened." Mr. Johnson stepped forward, his eyebrows raised. "Did you do that, Orion?" The boy shook his head. "I didn't mean to. Sometimes things just happen when we're feeling strange." Mrs. Johnson glanced at her husband, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "Maybe we should find out more about their abilities," she said softly. As the night wore on, the family sat together in the living room, discussing what had happened. "Do you have any other powers?" Sarah asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Lyra looked at her twin brother and then back at Sarah. "Yes, but we must be careful," she said. "We can do things that might scare people." "Scare people? Like what?" Jake asked, leaning closer. Lyra took a deep breath. "I can feel what others are feeling, and sometimes I can show them things with my mind." Orion chimed in. "I can move things without touching them, like the ball earlier, but I can also make things disappear." The children's eyes grew wide with excitement and fear. "Make things disappear," Jake repeated, his voice filled with awe. "Yes," Orion replied, his voice steady. "But it can be dangerous. We must use our powers wisely." Mrs. Johnson noticed the serious look on the twins' faces. "You can trust us," she said gently. "We just want to help you." Lyra nodded, feeling a little more at ease. "Okay, we will show you, but promise you won't be scared." "Promise," Jake and Sarah said in unison, eager for more adventure. After a moment of silence, Lyra closed her eyes. Slowly, she raised her hand, and a small toy car on the floor began to hover in the air. The car spun around gracefully before gently landing back on the ground. "Wow!" Jake shouted, clapping his hands. "That's amazing." Orion smiled shyly, happy to see his sister showing off her power. "Now I want to try," he said, looking around the room. His eyes landed on a lamp on the table. He focused hard, and suddenly the lamp flickered before it started to float. "Be careful." Mrs. Johnson gasped, worried it might fall. Orion looked at the lamp, then back at his family. "I can make it stay up," he said confidently. The lamp floated higher, hovering just below the ceiling. The room was filled with gasps and laughter. Then, without warning, the lamp vanished into thin air. The family stared in shock. "Where did it go?" Sarah exclaimed, looking around. It's okay. I'll bring it back, Orion promised. With a flick of his wrist, the lamp reappeared, landing softly on the table. That was incredible, Mr. Johnson said, a mix of fear and amazement in his voice. You both have such special powers. Lyra smiled, feeling proud. But we have to keep them secret. If others find out, they might want to hurt us. The family fell silent, realizing the weight of the twins' words. They had to protect the twins, not just from the world, but also from the dangers that came with their abilities. Mrs. Johnson put her arm around Lyra and Orion, offering comfort. You're safe here. We will help you, she assured them. The night continued with stories and laughter, but in the back of their minds, everyone knew that things were changing. The Johnson family had taken in 2 alien twins with extraordinary powers, and soon they would all face challenges they never expected. But together, they felt ready for whatever lay ahead. As they settled in for the night, the family shared their hopes and fears, united by the strange bond that had formed between them and the twins. Little did they know, the adventure was just beginning, and their lives would never be the same. Secrets of the past. The morning sun streamed through the Johnsons' kitchen window, warming the room and filling it with light. The smell of pancakes wafted through the air as Mrs. Johnson flipped them on the griddle. Jake and Sarah sat at the table, excitedly discussing the events of the previous night. Can you believe how cool their powers are? Jake exclaimed, his eyes wide with enthusiasm. I want to learn how to do that. Me too, but we have to be careful, Sarah replied, remembering what Lyra and Orion had said about their powers. They said it could be dangerous. Just then, the twins walked into the kitchen, their hair tousled from sleep. Good morning, Lyra said brightly, her voice cheerful. Orion followed, yawning but smiling. Breakfast is ready, Mrs. Johnson called, placing a stack of pancakes in front of the twins. I hope you like them. Lyra and Orion exchanged glances before sitting down. They weren't used to such simple foods. On their home planet, they had a very different diet, but they smiled, eager to try. As they ate, Jake couldn't hold back his curiosity. Can you tell us more about your home? What was it like? He asked, leaning closer to the twins. Lyra looked at Orion, who nodded encouragingly. Okay, she said slowly, but it's not a happy story. The family quieted down, their attention fully on the twins. We come from a beautiful planet called Zafira. It has bright colors and tall trees. The sky is always blue, and there are floating islands, she began, her voice filled with a mix of joy and sadness. But then, everything changed. Orion added, his voice heavy. Our parents were the rulers, the king and queen. We had a happy life until one day, a group of bad people came. They wanted to take our throne. Mrs. Johnson reached out, placing a comforting hand on Orion's arm. That sounds terrible. What happened next? We had to run, Lyra said, her voice trembling. Our parents told us to hide. They fought to protect us. We escaped in a small ship, but we got lost. That's how we ended up here. Jake's eyes grew wide. What about the gem? You said it was important. Lyra looked at the gem, which lay on the table, its soft glow illuminating their faces. Yes, the gem is our key. It can open a portal to Zafira. It also holds our royal power. If we can find a way to use it, we can return and reclaim our throne. The family exchanged glances, realizing the gravity of what the twins were saying. But what if those bad people find you again? Sarah asked, her voice filled with concern. Lyra lowered her gaze, sadness washing over her face. That is why we have to be careful. They want to capture us and take the gem. Mr. Johnson's expression turned serious. We will protect you. You are safe here with us. But we need to learn how to use the gem's power, Orion said, looking determined. If we can unlock its magic, we can return home and save our planet. Mrs. Johnson thought for a moment. Maybe we can figure it out together. We can practice using your ability safely. Excited by the idea, Jake jumped in. Yes, let's have a training day. We can start today. After breakfast, the family headed to the backyard, which had a lot of space for practicing. The twins felt nervous but also excited. They had never practiced their powers like this before. Okay, let's see what you can do, Mr. Johnson encouraged, standing in front of them. Orion, why don't you start? Orion took a deep breath and focused on a small rock lying on the grass. The rock lifted slowly into the air, spinning gently. The family clapped and cheered, amazed at his control. Great job, Orion, Mrs. Johnson praised. Now let's see you make it disappear. Orion nodded and concentrated hard. The rock vanished in a flash, leaving everyone speechless. Then, with a wave of his hand, it reappeared, dropping back to the ground. Wow, that's incredible, Jake shouted, his eyes wide with admiration. Your turn, Lyra, Sarah urged, eager to see her powers in action. Lyra took a step forward, feeling the energy around her. I can show you what I feel, she said softly. She closed her eyes and concentrated, imagining a warm, bright light. Suddenly, a soft glow surrounded her, illuminating the area like a warm sunbeam. The Johnsons gasped, their eyes wide with wonder. That's beautiful, Mrs. Johnson exclaimed, her heart filled with warmth. Lyra smiled, feeling confident. I can share this light with others. It helps them feel happy. Let's practice together, Jake suggested, excited to join in. We can work on a team. For the next hour, they practiced and laughed, sharing tips and helping each other. They found ways to combine their abilities, and it felt like magic. The backyard filled with energy and laughter, but a lingering thought stayed in everyone's mind. The bad people who wanted to capture the twins were still out there. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the yard, Mrs. Johnson called everyone back in. Great job today, everyone. But remember, we must stay cautious. We can't let anyone know about your powers. The twins nodded, feeling grateful to have found a family who cared for them. But they also understood the challenges ahead. They had to find a way to unlock the gem's power and reclaim their home while keeping their new family safe. That night, as they settled into bed, Lyra and Orion shared their fears. What if they come for us? Lyra whispered, her voice shaking. Orion took her hand, reassuring her. We'll be ready. Together, we can face anything. The Johnsons were asleep in their rooms, unaware of the storm brewing in the distance. But for Lyra and Orion, the journey was just beginning. Secrets of the past were unfolding, and their future held both hope and danger. Together, they would have to face whatever came their way, united as one family. A new threat. The next few days passed in a flurry of excitement and practice for the Johnson family and the alien twins. Each day, they spent hours in the backyard, experimenting with their powers and learning how to work together. The bond between them grew stronger, filled with laughter and joy. But in the back of their minds, a shadow loomed, the threat of the enemy searching for Lyra and Orion. One afternoon, while they were practicing, Sarah suddenly paused. Do you feel that? She asked, glancing around the yard. The air felt different, heavy with tension. Lyra frowned, her big eyes scanning the surroundings. I do. Something doesn't feel right. Jake, standing next to them, looked worried. What do you think it is? Before anyone could answer, a loud crash echoed from the front yard. The family turned, their hearts racing. Mr. Johnson rushed to the front door, followed closely by everyone else. When they stepped outside, they were met with a shocking sight. A sleek, dark vehicle had pulled up in front of their house, and two tall figures stepped out. They wore dark suits and helmets that covered their faces. The twins recognized them immediately. They were the bad people from Zephyra. Run, Orion shouted, grabbing Lyra's hand. They turned to flee into the house, but the intruders were fast. One of them raised a hand, and suddenly a strange energy field surrounded the yard. trapping everyone inside. "What do we do?" Jake yelled, panic in his voice. "Stay together," Mr. Johnson commanded, trying to keep everyone calm. He stepped forward, his face determined. "What do you want from us?" One of the figures stepped closer, his voice cold and mechanical. "We have come for the twins. Hand them over, and we will leave peacefully." Mrs. Johnson stepped protectively in front of Lyra and Orion. "You can't take them. They are safe here." "They are royal heirs to the throne of Zephyra," the figure replied, his tone unyielding. "They belong to us." Lyra and Orion clutched each other, fear shining in their eyes. "You can't have us," Lyra shouted, her voice trembling but defiant. "We won't go back with you." The figure turned to the twins, annoyance flashing in his eyes. "You have no choice. Your powers belong to us." Orion stepped forward, a spark of courage igniting within him. "We are not your property. We will fight for our freedom." Suddenly, the energy field pulsed, growing stronger around them. Mr. Johnson felt the pressure, his heart racing. "Lyra, Orion, we need to use your powers together. Focus on the gem." The twins nodded, their expressions shifting from fear to determination. They both held the glowing gem tightly, feeling its warmth pulsing in their hands. Lyra closed her eyes and reached out with her mind, trying to connect with Orion. "We can do this together. We must show them our strength." Orion took a deep breath and focused on the intruders. He raised his hand, and the ground shook beneath their feet. The figures stumbled backward, surprised. "What is happening?" one of them shouted, looking around. Lyra opened her eyes, a fierce determination in her gaze. "Now," she cried. Together, they summoned their powers, creating a brilliant flash of light. The energy field flickered as the light engulfed the yard, pushing against the darkness of the intruders. The two figures hesitated, their mechanical voices faltering. "No, we must retrieve them," one shouted, but it was too late. The light grew brighter, illuminating the entire area and causing the dark vehicle to shudder. Jake, Sarah, and Mrs. Johnson shielded their eyes, watching in awe. The light began to expand, pushing back the intruders and their energy field. For a moment, it felt as if time had stopped. Then, with a sudden burst, the light exploded outward, forcing the intruders away from the Johnson home. They stumbled backward, falling to the ground as the power of Lyra and Orion surged through them. "Run," Mr. Johnson shouted, urging everyone to move. The family dashed toward the back of the house, escaping the energy field as it flickered and faded. As they reached the backyard, Orion turned to Lyra. "We did it," he exclaimed, feeling a rush of adrenaline. But their victory was short-lived as they heard the figures getting back up. "We will not give up," the first figure growled, adjusting his helmet. "You cannot hide forever." With that, they retreated to their vehicle, but not before warning them. "You will pay for this. The Emperor will find you, and he will not be kind." As the dark vehicle sped away, the Johnsons stood in shock, catching their breath. They had faced a real threat for the first time, and it had shaken them all. "Are you okay?" Mrs. Johnson asked, her voice filled with concern as she looked at Lyra and Orion. The twins nodded, though their expressions were serious. "We're fine," Lyra said, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. "But they'll come back. We need to be ready." Mr. Johnson took a deep breath, his mind racing. "We need a plan. We can't let them take you, and we must find a way to unlock the full power of the gem." As they gathered together, discussing their next steps, the weight of the situation sank in. They had fought back this time, but the threat was still there, lurking in the shadows. Together, they needed to stand strong against the darkness. That night, the Johnson family gathered in the living room, forming the united front. They shared their fears, their hopes, and their determination to protect each other. The bond between them had deepened, and they all knew that the journey ahead would be challenging. With the stars shining bright outside, they felt ready to face whatever came next. They were not just a family anymore. They were allies in a fight for freedom, and they would not back down. The royal secret. The days after the attack were tense for the Johnson family and the twins. They stayed close, always keeping an eye out for the dark vehicle that had come to take them. Every sound outside made them jump. Every shadow seemed like a new threat. But they also felt a growing determination. They were not just going to sit back and wait. They were going to uncover the secrets of the gem and find a way to protect themselves. One afternoon, while the sun was shining bright in the sky, Mrs. Johnson decided it was time for a break. "Let's have a family day. We need to relax and remember what we're fighting for," she suggested. The kids agreed, eager for a distraction. "Can we go to the park?" Jake asked, his eyes shining with excitement. "It would be fun to have a picnic." "Great idea." Sarah chimed in. "We can bring sandwiches and play games." So they packed a picnic basket full of food and set off to the park. The sun shone down, and laughter filled the air as they set up their picnic blanket under a big tree. The twins looked around, curious about the new environment. It was different from their home planet, but they liked it. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily. They played games, told stories, and enjoyed the warm sun on their faces. For a moment, it felt like everything was normal, like they didn't have to worry about the threat hanging over them. But as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, Lyra felt a tug in her heart. "I want to know more about the gem," she said, her voice serious. "There's something special about it, and I feel like it's trying to tell me something." Orion nodded in agreement. "Yes, we need to learn its secrets. It might hold the key to our powers and our future." Mrs. Johnson smiled gently. "Maybe we can find a quiet place to talk about it. The park is nice, but we need focus to uncover its secrets." The family agreed and decided to head back home. Once they were in the living room, the atmosphere shifted. Everyone felt the weight of the moment. They gathered around the coffee table, and Lyra placed the glowing gem in the center. As they stared at the gem, its light pulsed softly, illuminating their faces. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her curiosity piqued. "We need to connect with it," Orion replied. "I can feel the energy, but we must work together." Lyra took a deep breath and held out her hands, focusing on the gem. "Let's all touch it. Maybe it will show us something." One by one, they placed their hands on the gem. The moment they did, a warm wave of energy flowed through them, making their hearts race. The room filled with a soft light, and they felt a connection unlike anything before. Suddenly, visions flashed in their minds. They saw images of Zephyra, a vibrant planet with colorful landscapes and bright skies. They saw the castle where Lyra and Orion had lived, filled with laughter and joy. But then, the images turned dark. The bad people stormed the castle, chaos erupted, and the twins fled into the unknown. Lyra gasped, pulling her hands back. "I saw it. I saw our home." Orion's eyes were wide with excitement. "Me too. We must remember these images. They are part of our story." "What does it all mean?" Jake asked, a mix of confusion and wonder on his face. "The gem is a key to our past," Lyra explained. "It holds our memories and our powers. If we can unlock its full potential, we can protect ourselves and find a way back home." Mrs. Johnson looked thoughtful. "But how do we unlock its secrets?" "We need to be careful. The more we learn, the more the bad people will want to stop us." "Maybe we can use our powers to practice," Orion suggested. "If we work together, we might be able to strengthen our connection to the gem." The family nodded, feeling the excitement build within them. They were determined to find a way to protect themselves and help the twins reclaim their rightful place. Over the next few days, they practiced hard, spending time in the backyard, honing their skills. They tried to communicate with the gem and connect with its energy. Each practice session brought them closer to understanding its secrets. One evening, As the sun dipped below the horizon, Lyra felt a surge of energy within her. "I think I can feel its heartbeat," she whispered, her eyes shining. "It wants us to find something." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, intrigued. "The gem has a purpose," Lyra continued, excitement bubbling in her voice. "It wants us to unlock a hidden power, a royal secret that can help us." Orion looked at her with determination. "Then we must discover it. Together, we can uncover the truth." They spent the night brainstorming ideas, trying to think of what the gem might be hiding. With each idea, they felt a growing sense of purpose. They were not just a family. They were a team, ready to fight for their future. As the moon shone bright in the sky, illuminating their faces, they knew they were on the brink of something important. The royal secret of the gem was waiting to be uncovered, and they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would find the strength to protect each other and their hopes for the future. With newfound determination, they set their minds to unlocking the secrets of the gem, knowing that the path ahead would be filled with both challenges and discoveries. Each day brought them closer to their destiny, and they felt the pull of their royal heritage guiding them toward a brighter future. Teamwork for the plan. The next few days were filled with excitement and preparation. The Johnson family and the alien twins were determined to protect themselves from the threats lurking in the shadows. They knew that teamwork was their greatest strength, and together, they could achieve anything. One evening, as they gathered around the dining table, Mrs. Johnson looked at everyone with a serious expression. "We need a plan. We can't just wait for them to come back. We must be ready to fight for our freedom." Jake, who had been quiet for a while, finally spoke up. "What if we set up a few traps around the house? We can use some of the things in the garage." "That's a great idea," Sarah exclaimed. "We can use ropes, paint cans, and anything else we find. If they come back, they won't know what hit them." Lyra and Orion listened closely, their eyes sparkling with excitement. "We can help too," Lyra said. "We can use our powers to strengthen the traps and make them more effective." "Good thinking," Mr. Johnson replied, feeling a wave of pride wash over him. "Let's start working on our plan right away. We'll need to work together to make it happen." They all finished dinner quickly, their minds racing with ideas. After cleaning up, they headed to the garage, which was filled with tools, ropes, and other supplies. The kids rummaged through boxes, pulling out items they thought could be useful. "What about this?" Jake held up a long piece of rope. "We can tie this between the trees. If someone runs into it, they will trip." "Perfect," Orion said, grinning. "We can also use these cans to make noise. It will alert us if someone is coming." As they brainstormed ideas, Sarah suggested, "We should also create a safe room, somewhere we can all go if things get really dangerous." The group agreed, and they decided the basement would be their safe space. It was away from the windows and doors, making it a good place to hide. Mr. Johnson stepped forward, his expression serious. "Let's make sure the basement is secure. We can put some of these shelves in front of the door. That will block anyone from getting in easily." The team worked tirelessly, setting up traps around the yard and reinforcing the basement door. Lyra and Orion practiced using their powers to enhance the traps. They created a shield around the house that glowed faintly, invisible to the naked eye, but effective against any threat. As they worked, the atmosphere shifted from fear to determination. They felt empowered as they transformed their home into a fortress. The Johnsons and the twins worked side by side, laughter echoing through the air, reminding them of the bond they had built. After hours of hard work, they gathered in the living room, tired but satisfied. "I think we did a great job," Jake said, wiping sweat from his brow. "We are ready for whatever comes our way." Orion nodded, feeling a sense of pride. "We have become a strong team. Together, we can face anything." The mercenary laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the night. "You think you can stop me? You're just a bunch of kids and a couple of humans." Lyra felt a surge of energy rising within her. We're not just kids. We have powers, and we will protect what's ours," she shouted, her voice full of confidence. Orion stepped forward, his expression fierce. "You made a big mistake coming here. We're stronger together, and we won't let you take us." As the tension escalated, the mercenary lunged forward. The family moved quickly, each person falling into their roles. Mr. Johnson threw a paint can from their traps, which crashed to the ground and startled the mercenary, slowing his advance. "Now," Mrs. Johnson shouted, signaling Lyra and Orion. The twins focused their energy, feeling the connection between them that had grown stronger during their training. They raised their hands, and a bright shield of light burst forth, enveloping their family and pushing back the mercenary. "What is this?" he shouted, taken aback by the power they were displaying. "Teamwork," Sarah yelled, her voice filled with determination. "And you're about to find out just how powerful we really are." The shield shimmered, reflecting the moonlight and creating a barrier that blocked the mercenary's path. He growled in frustration, looking for a way to break through. "Enough of this," he yelled, pulling out a small device from his pocket. He pressed a button, and a strange energy field crackled to life around him. "I'll take you all down." The mercenary charged toward the shield, and with a fierce shout, he unleashed a wave of energy. The impact was strong, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The Johnsons stumbled, but they quickly regained their footing, rallying around the twins. "Hold the shield," Mr. Johnson commanded, his heart pounding. Lyra and Orion gritted their teeth, focusing harder than ever. They poured their energy into the shield, trying to withstand the force pressing against them. The barrier flickered but held strong. "We can do this," Orion shouted. "We have to believe in ourselves." Just then, a thought crossed Lyra's mind. "We need to use the gem. It can help us." She glanced at the glowing gem still in her pocket. "I can feel it calling to us." With a quick nod from Orion, they reached for the gem, feeling its warmth radiating through their fingers. As they held it together, a powerful energy surged around them. The gem lit up, brighter than before, filling the air with a vibrant glow. "Now," they shouted in unison. They directed the energy toward the mercenary, a wave of light and power that surged forth like a tidal wave. The mercenary looked terrified as the energy hit him, enveloping him in a blinding light. "No," he screamed, trying to resist the force pushing against him, but it was too late. The energy engulfed him, pushing him back into the shadows where he had come from. With a final burst of power, the shield shattered, and the mercenary was gone. The Johnson family and the twins stood breathless, their hearts racing in disbelief. "We did it," Jake exclaimed, jumping up and down. "We really did it." The twins exchanged proud glances, feeling the weight of what they had just accomplished. They had protected their family and shown their strength. Lyra turned to her new family, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for believing in us. We couldn't have done it without you." Mrs. Johnson hugged Lyra tightly. "You're part of our family now. We're always here for you." As they stood together, they knew this was just the beginning. They had faced a great danger and emerged victorious, but there was still much to learn about the gem and their royal heritage. "We need to learn more about our past," Orion said, looking at the gem in Lyra's hands. "It holds so many secrets." Mr. Johnson nodded in agreement. "And we need to stay alert. There might be more threats out there." The family shared a determined look, knowing they were stronger together. With each challenge, they had grown closer, and they were ready to face whatever the future held. As they made their way back inside the house, a sense of calm washed over them. They had overcome a great obstacle and learned the true power of teamwork, love, and family. In that moment, they felt unstoppable, ready to embrace their next adventure together, knowing that as long as they had each other, they could face anything. The bond they had formed was unbreakable, and they were ready to discover the royal truth that lay ahead. "Now we need to practice our teamwork," Mrs. Johnson suggested. We should run through our plan and make sure everyone knows what to do if trouble comes. They all agreed and decided to simulate a potential attack. Okay, let's pretend the bad people are here, Mr. Johnson said, his voice steady. Orion, Lyra, you will be in charge of using your powers to protect us. Sarah, Jake, and I will work on setting up the traps. As they began their practice, the excitement was palpable. They split into groups, each person taking on a specific role. Lyra and Orion concentrated on creating a protective barrier around their safe zone, while the others set up the traps, giggling nervously at the thought of what could happen. Imagine the bad guys walking right into our traps. Jake laughed, pretending to act out the scene. They'll be so confused. Right. Sarah joined in, her eyes sparkling. We'll make sure they regret ever coming here. As they practiced, they became more synchronized. Lyra and Orion began to connect with each other's energy, finding a rhythm that allowed them to strengthen their powers. It felt like they were dancing in harmony, each move building off the other. Then, just as they were finishing their run-through, a loud crash echoed from the backyard. Everyone froze, hearts racing. Did you hear that? Orion whispered, his eyes wide with fear. Yes, Lyra replied, her voice steady despite the tension. It came from outside. Mr. Johnson nodded, his face serious. We need to be alert. This could be it, the moment we've been preparing for. The family quickly moved to the back door, peering out into the yard. The sun had set, and shadows danced in the fading light. They could see a figure in the distance, lurking near the edge of the woods. We need to stay calm, Mrs. Johnson said, gripping the doorknob tightly. Remember the plan. The tension in the air was thick as they watched the figure move closer. The team's heartbeats echoed in their ears, but they were ready. They had trained hard, and now they would put their skills to the test. On my count, Mr. Johnson whispered, his voice low but firm. 3, 2, 1, go. As they swung open the door, the energy in the air shifted. They were a team, ready to defend their home, protect the twins, and confront whatever lay ahead. The time for action had come, and they were prepared to face the challenge together. The final showdown. The air was thick with tension as the Johnson family and the twins stood at the back door, ready for whatever was coming. The figure in the shadows moved closer, revealing a tall, menacing figure dressed in dark clothing. Its eyes glinted under the pale moonlight, sending shivers down everyone's spine. Stay close together, Mr. Johnson instructed, his voice steady despite the fear racing through him. The family huddled together, Lyra and Orion standing protectively in front of Sarah and Jake. The twins could feel their powers buzzing, ready to be unleashed. Who are you? Mr. Johnson called out, his voice strong. What do you want? The figure stepped into the light, revealing a face that sent chills through the group. It was one of the men from the attack, a mercenary hired to find the twins and the gem. He smirked, a cold and unsettling smile that made the Johnsons' hearts race. I'm here for what belongs to me, he sneered, looking directly at the twins. You can hand over the gem, or things will get messy. No way, Jake shouted, anger flaring inside him. You'll never get it.